setting the scene. Let's sort of get this going. Arguably, the copper and cable sectors have deliberately held back the UK from installing fibre. The copper and cable industries said that no one will ever need more than 24 megabits per second, so FTTC and cable are fit for the long run, causing significant damage to communities and the economy of the UK. So there, as that as a setting scene, perhaps the panel would like to introduce themselves. I'll start at the other end and work this way.
Good morning, I'm Paul Broadhurst, CEO, founder in 1990 of Technetix. We supply broadband cable and broadband for fibre, FTTx, and recently emerging into mobile.
Hi, I'm Alex Marshall at Cailem Consulting, and we advise on fibre to the home startups and integrations.
Hi everybody, my name's Ian Cowser. I'm the Fibre to the Home project programme manager for Corning Optical Communications, and we are a passive optical vendor of equipment.
Hi, I'm Helen Wylde-Archibald. I'm the CEO of Wildanet. We're a regional player in Devon and Cornwall and the southwest, delivering broadband to the places no one else will do.
Do we have presentations? Do you have presentations? We work at random to see who comes up first. Alex. any questions before we get going? Yeah? All right. We'll work on that. I'm going to play hot seat, I think.
When you get Shanghai for these things, they don't tell you you're starting first. Thanks. Next. I've got all green with my logos. So I'm going to set a few points out really for us to talk about and to hang hopefully some topics on during the rest of the day. So let's start with some simple things. I saw the beginning slide talked about rural. Well, I'm going to talk about not rural, because actually something like 15% of the UK is a hotspot. It has no fibre broadband, principally because it's DIG, but also tenanted buildings where it's difficult to get into. So I think whilst we're largely considering rural today, we need to think that here in the middle of London there are places that are essentially rural in terms of their broadband, fibre broadband take-up. And in fact, copper broadband's pretty poor here as well. Anyone trying to make a mobile phone call also find the mobile doesn't work very well here either. So we do need to think about what used to be called not spots in mobile land, and I think there's now not spots in broadband as well, fibre broadband. Moving more to rural areas, there are big challenges with getting to some of the properties. It's not just passing them, it's getting to them. So you're getting down, I'm sure Helen's nodding, you go down the road, you take your fibre down the road, and you can just about see the customer if you peer very deeply into the distance. They've maybe got private poles down their driveway, maybe 20, 30 private poles. So suddenly connecting a premise costs more than actually getting past it. So these things need to be considered too. And it's often they're the places where you find small businesses, and they're the people that really do need ultra-fast broadband to compete in today's business environment. You quite often hear that wireless is the solution. But it isn't. Wireless is great as long as you're the customer. As soon as there are two customers, it's half as good, and so on and so forth. And every time there's a new release of 3G, HSDPA+, 4G, LTE, 5G, I don't know, I stand at Euston Station and go, isn't that marvellous? And 6 weeks later it's half as marvellous. And then within about a year it's not marvellous at all. So I'm waiting for 6G now to get a decent signal in Euston Station. So that's the tyranny of wireless. The more you use it, the less good it is. However, for the fibre industry, that's really another message, because to get high-speed wireless, the range shortens, and with that shortened range, you've got to deliver that backhaul. You've got to deliver that bandwidth to that cell site, and the only way to do that nowadays is with fibre. So we're building fibre not only for fixed line customers, we're building it for the wireless industry as well. And that need to drive it deeper will just increase. So we're going to all talk about rural broadband and hope there's one silver bullet. Well, there isn't. Rural is very different in very many different places. So the sort of challenges you found in the southwest are not the sort of challenges you find in the Isle of Skye, and not the sort of challenges you find in the east of England, nor is it the same as a hilltop in Wales. And so the solutions for rurals are many and varied, and potentially many and varied in the same area. The biggest challenge for rural, if you think about rural, there's maybe 600 houses, call it a village. Actually, those 600 houses look just like a town. They're not difficult at all. They're the same as a town. It's getting to it, which may be 25 miles of backhaul, and that's where the cost really starts multiplying. And also, when you've got that backhaul, you need to be able to break into it, because on the way to that village, there are houses, there are farms, there are small hamlets, there are small businesses. And so solutions to break into that backhaul at irregular intervals without having a fibre bundle that size is very much the sort of thing we need to be considering. The other thing is, if you're in the town, if you're in here in London, and you've got fibre broadband to your home, for instance, or fibre broadband to your small business, and it stops working, inevitably it does sometimes, the solution is just to tether your mobile, and you get a decent outcome. That's not possible if you live in rural for many, many places. So resilience is really a big issue as soon as you move out of towns. In towns, you've got the ability to build a software-defined network. You can have 2, 3, 4, 6 fibre providers if you're lucky, and 2 wireless infrastructures. You've got Cornerstone and MBNN, and you can add all that together.
There's so much going on here. I need to make those, because if nobody else is doing it, at some point I'm going to start.
You can add all of that together to
To
create a resilient solution. I'll swap you for that one.
Keep going.
That resilient solution is not available to you in the countryside, and that's more important because the outages will be longer, and something like 40% of all small businesses are based in the countryside, not in cities. So it's important we think about resilience, and fibre to the home on a PON mechanism is inherently difficult to make resilient. So we need to think forward about that. And also, infrastructure resilience is not promoted by using PIA, because by using PIA, you're using the same infrastructure as the competitors. So you might have an altnet and you might have BT. And that would be the ideal position if you're a rural business. However, they use the same duct, and that's not resilient. Talking about take-up, the problem with take-up is there's not really a killer app that says I need 200 megabits of bandwidth, 300 megabits of bandwidth, 2 gigabits of bandwidth. And it annoys me greatly that the TV industry and the film industry spend all their time inventing ever more clever codecs to compress signals to the point you can barely see a football when it's compressed. Anyone watching ITV4 will know what I'm talking about. And yet, 60-70% of all homes in Europe now have gigabit broadband. So you've got a content industry compressing stuff to the point where it's unwatchable. And you've got a delivery mechanism that is largely empty. And that has to change, because that is the killer app, high quality video. I don't think we as an industry are doing a very good job of selling copper switch off. There are many benefits to derived voice, and there are many more things you can do with voice on a derived platform that you can't do on a copper platform. I don't think we're selling that very well. And we spent, and it's a historical thing, we can't do much about it, we spent a very long time telling the public they already have fibre, when it is in fact copper. And on the doorstep, done it myself. I've got 20 megabits and do a few emails, that's all I need. And if your video is compressed to 2 megabits per second, it's probably true. And I think another point for longer debate is we have a policy that promotes building but not take-up. So all of the government subsidy and all the government's efforts is about building networks, it's not about using them. And I think the time for that to change is now. Because without customers coming to the network, the building coverage will gradually, and it is, grinding to a halt, and those not spots will exist for a very long time indeed. Am I doing okay for time?
You're not quite getting me kicking off yet, but you know, another minute
Right,
if you want.
another minute, right, I'll keep going. I'll go quicker. And to value, the great advantages of fibre to the home as a new technology is there's not much technology involved. So the technology stack is relatively simple, and therefore the IT stack is simple. So integrating networks where they're coming together and merging, relatively simple. And the advantage of that IT stack is it's a low cost. The advantage of low cost is we can offer a low cost product to customers. As long as we maintain the reliability and resilience, the cost to serve will be much less than it has been in legacy networks, and we can deliver that to customers. And some of the tools coming around and coming up, and I'm going to use the AI word at risk of being over-enthusiastic, but particularly in omni-channel contact, AI now is really working with natural speech models. Predictive fault management starting to come, and you can build AI models yourself with that, with very little integration. Augmented reality for fault finding is quite good fun. You can colour your fibres red and green, and then use a Google API to actually walk down the street and see red and green fibres on the street, and then walk into a lamppost. It's a comedy effect. And connecting to that is the planning systems. Historically, it's been sort of a thing we use for planning and building networks, and then forget about them, and they fall into disrepair. That shouldn't be allowed to happen this time. We need to keep the planning system as a plan of current record. You can link that with operations and use it in life, because sure as eggs is eggs, we're going to have to do some re-engineering of these networks. Just adding resilience, for instance, you're going to have to know where things are. And so keep a hold of that planning information, keep it fresh, keep it new, and use it in operations, I think.
Right. Who here either lives or works in a rural environment? Who here agrees that the idea that urban areas are just as bad as rural areas? A load of old nonsense. In fact, we've got quite a bit here, haven't we? Earlier we had people saying no one's going to need more than 24 megabits per second. Well, we've upped it to 200, but we're still on that. And well, there's no killer app, we don't need that. The killer app is high quality video. So our future is determined by groups of 22 grown men kicking a ball about. Basically, that's... No, there's got to be more to it than that. 60% of people already have gigabit, so we don't need to worry about it. There's no point compressing because everyone's got gigabit. We are here to remember that they don't, of course. And integrating networks is simple. Okay. Let's have a look. So, we said, comments, heckles, questions, all welcome. Still welcome. Oh dear. Helen.
Right. Lovely. Okay. So I'm going to talk about Wildanet in a different concept in terms of what we are trying to do, okay, because we've talked a lot already about the industry, and I'm now going to talk about what I do in the Southwest. And when we set the company up, and Paddy's one of our founders, who's now CEO of Inca, we set up a company for profit and purpose, because we'd gone to the Southwest and we realised that the Southwest was getting left behind. And I think, Barn, you were in a similar situation in the North. And actually, I'm a Southwest girl, and I come back after a fairly successful career and found that most of my compatriots had not moved on, and poverty was still everywhere, and it was because of digital exclusion. So Wildanet is not your normal company. We are absolutely set on a mission which is about sustainability and social value, and that's quite important. So we're based in Cornwall. We've got a building in the middle of Liskeard, and we serve homes and businesses across Cornwall and Devon. we made the decision to employ locally. So 92% of everyone who works for me comes from Devon and Cornwall. That presents its own challenges, so we had to set up an academy. Okay, so we now train everybody to actually come into the workplace, to be engineers, to do customer services, and that has served us extraordinarily well, both in terms of customer connections, because they can see it's their fathers, sons, brothers, daughters, or whatever, in terms of that community piece, but also you can see that we're trying to work with the community rather than against it. So our purpose really was to make sure that nobody got left behind in Cornwall. We wanted to do that in a responsible and sensible way. And on the back of that, everyone laughed at us, okay? Well, we're still building, and I'll still be building in 2027 and beyond, right? So maybe we got something right by just focusing on the bits that nobody else will do and working with the government to deliver those programmes and the community. And it's the point that you made there, Alex. You work with the community to get the connections as you go. You don't build a vanity product, a network that no one's going to use. And we do all the bits that no one else will touch. So let's talk about Cornwall. Cornwall has got 500,000 souls, okay? It's an enormous county with water on 3 sides. Most of them wish we could dig the Tamar out and leave the rest of the UK alone. However, we've not managed to work out the engineering for that just yet. We're still working on it, okay? 13% of the population in Cornwall have never used the internet, okay? When we started, it was about 38%. So you can make a difference. There are applications people need. Also got an ageing population. So we've got 10 times more people over the age of 60, 20 times more people over the age of 70, and 30 times over the age of 80 as a community. So that means you need to serve that community in the right way. It doesn't mean that they're all completely not aware of what IT is, but quite a lot of them struggle with it. They're not nomads. They've not come to it. They're not digital natives. So spend the time and educate. And the other thing about Cornwall, it's really, really poor. In fact, women out-earn men. It's the only county in the UK that does that. And you have to stop and ask why. And the reason is it's a gig economy. You only work 7 months of the year. There's no manufacturing industry. The only way that they're going to stop being the poorest county in Great Britain is if they get hold of digital, because we don't have the mass of people to do manufacturing, but actually we can do a digital economy. So for us and what we are doing, this is the way out of poverty for a county which has been bottom of the rankings for the last 50 years. And effectively, that's what we're trying to do. So that's what the app is. The killer app for us in Cornwall is the opportunity to move out of poverty. And I think for Barn, it's similar in some of your communities as well. We have no motorways. For those who visited, you're well aware of it, okay? Well, those who build down there, we have no verges, even more difficult. So no point having a ditch witch, no point having a mole plough. We can't do that. We've just got high hedges and loads of granite, okay? So most of Cornwall is in private ownership as well, just to make things more complicated, if you can find the owner. And our lives in terms of building that network is really rats, rubble, radon, and rainwater, okay? And that's what I do for a living. And in fact, actually, Wadebridge, thank you, Wadebridge, 3 swimming pools of water before we could put the infrastructure in, okay? That's an average day at Wildanet, right? We couldn't do that without the government support of BDUK and Project Gigabit, and no one in their right mind will be following us because, quite frankly, I know how much it costs, okay? So it's a really, really difficult build. And thank you, BT, the state of your PIA is, quite frankly, awful, okay? Please don't put that bit on YouTube, okay? So the other issue that we have as well is in terms of the planning piece, which was mentioned previously, we were happily digging our way through St Just and suddenly found a 20-foot crypt under the ground, which isn't on any of the planning pieces. And the local government said, well, who's going to fill that in? I said, well, it's 20 foot down and there's a crypt. I think we need to find out who it belongs to. That also is not uncommon, okay? One of our other SEDs was basically someone had shoved literally the whole of the piping full of red socks because the village kept getting flooded at the other end and they thought it's coming down the pipe. So they'd used the entire football club, which was then defunct, to fill the hole in, right? Now you take a photograph of that and take that to BDUK and say, this is the reason I can't build that network, all right? You don't need to be a sophisticated engineer to survive Cornwall. That is rural, right? And we can say all we like about it. It is a really, really tough gig. And the truth of the matter is, I bloody love it, all right? And I wouldn't work anywhere else. It's a fascinating place to be. Because what we are doing, when I'm being more serious about it, is adding a huge amount of value. So the network we're putting in will add a GVA to the local economy of 615 million quid. That's why I get out of bed every morning and deal with the Red Sox, all right? Because that is a life-changing amount of money to a county which has been bottom of the scorecard for a very long time. There's over 100 million equivalent of carbon taxation savings. So effectively, because we've got no motorways, it costs 16% more to travel in that county than anywhere else, okay? It really is quite hard. And effectively, every time we put in broadband, there's about £222 wellbeing factor per year for every household we do it for. So effectively, when you replace all the comments about why people aren't adopting, that is not the issue in Cornwall. The issue in Cornwall is if you want to have the toughest engineering gig of your life, then you're about to have it, okay? And that's really where we are in terms of those pieces. So what we actually talk about in terms of what is the killer app is social value. Okay, we are creating about £4 million of social value, and we do that because we've already created somewhere in the region of about 300 jobs directly and about 1,000 indirectly. Okay, now in a county of our size with that much retirement, that's pretty good going. We're one of the largest companies, and we wouldn't even rank in any other county. We're so small. Okay, that's how important is what we're doing. We're basically making sure people have got proper work experience, we're doing apprenticeships, we're making sure we borrow the VCEs, we're spending locally because we're a B Corp, so we buy everything locally from the coffee through to anything else I can get my hands on. In terms of staff support, that's also there, and the community, we are absolutely involved in that, making that happen. So consequently, that is what we're delivering as social value. And that's really important because what that effectively does is it brings the conversation about why this is important to the audience, which is the customer base, which is what we're all about, and that's what we're doing. So the way we went about that is we decided we would actually work on the B Corp certification. And people normally focus on the environmental benefits of becoming a B Corp, and it does give you an accreditation piece to work to, but actually it also gives you social value. And in the process of doing that, we formed a community in Cornwall where we're working really closely together to make economic value, social value, and environmental value really, really count. So the things that we've managed to do collectively across that whole community is 50% reduction in lorry movements. Believe me, with those roads, you want to do as little as possible. Minimal extraction of material which is sent to landfill, less use of quarry aggregate. We've got some special stuff that we use instead that the county's allowed us to use, and 50% less in asphalt, okay? So actually, again, working with the community, we are actually creating something which is very different in the way that we look after Cornwall. And someone made the comment about it being there forever. I do not ever want to have to dig up anywhere in Cornwall I've dug already because I know what's in the ground. We've cleared it all up, we've cleaned it out, we've sucked it clean, and we've left it properly labelled so people can utilise it. So we have built a gold standard network under Paddy's tutelage, and we have made sure that we've got our own ring around Cornwall, by the way, so we don't have to use as much PA as we would, and that means we are resilient. It also means in terms of defence, if you want to defend the UK, we would be the last call that you could get to the US to say someone's knocked up our satellites, or you could send for a trading call to say, actually, monetarily, if you do this trade now, you'll make more money. So people think Cornwall don't count. Wow. If you want to do a whole digital environment and change things, this is how you go about doing it. You put in a fibre network, high quality, and you create jobs and opportunity on the back of it. And that's what we're all about. So when we did the B Corp accreditation, we had one of those moments. I rather embarrassingly keep donkeys, and I was sitting feeding them with acorns in the garden. I was thinking, I've got this company, it's like a hand of bloody acorns, and next thing they're gone off my hand. But what I thought we would do is we'd actually see in 2023 if we couldn't get 22 other companies to come and be B Corps with us in the county. We ended up with 42, and we are now the largest number of B Corps outside of London. Okay, so as a set of companies and what we're trying to do, we are trying to grow as a community. If you want to do fibre, there is only one way to do it rurally. You have to do it as part of the community, and you've got to commit to that to deliver it, because you're going to have to show people what those applications and differences are. You're going to have to spend time on the doorstep with communities, taking them forward. And what that's given us is a community which supports us in delivering what we're trying to do and takes us to the next level in terms of penetration. So, lots of tree planting. I thoroughly enjoyed that, I have to say. And we've actually, again, working across the county to make sure those things happen, and it's a real mixture of who we do it. We also do a lot of work on digital hubs, and I know, again, Barn do a lot of this as well. It's really, really important work. If you want to get people to adapt your technology, the best thing you can do is actually make sure you've got digital community hubs which shows them how to use the stuff. And we've done this across those communities as we've gone forward, putting them from free of charge. So, Cornwall. In the words of Indra Hikani, nothing that is worthwhile is ever easy. Rural broadband is really, really tough. But if you're an engineer, it's probably the most fun you're going to have this century, quite frankly. It's really, really complicated. You will not do it without the support of the community that you live in, and you have to understand how that community works. If you don't understand and you're an outsider, you will be a blow-in, and you'll probably blow out because you will fail. It is all about community. That is what broadband does, is it brings community together and it helps them not get left behind. And Cornwall is a classic example of that, and we wouldn't be able to do it because of the expense involved if it wasn't for Project Gigabit. At the end of the day, that's what makes our company possible. And yes, for all of those who said we wouldn't survive, well, there you go, 2017, 2025, we're still alive and kicking, Barna's still alive and kicking, maybe we've got it right.
Okay, fair play to everyone, because I do accept that you can't heckle Helen, because there just isn't room, is there? So, okay, if you want to live without digital, if you want to knit yoghurt and hug trees, then that's fine. As long as you don't want to get old or get ill or anything like that, because we're all going to need digital at some point. Let's see who's next, because I don't know. Paul.
Well, I very much warm to you, Helen, because I come from the next county, Somerset, actually, and I don't think the broadband's there is much better, actually, to be honest. And I live now in Sussex, so let me start. Yeah, so Technetix. Technetix has been going for 35 years. We're a British company based in Sussex, although expanded exponentially over the last 35 years. We're operating 20 countries, selling to 70, and our customers include Virgin Media O2, Comcast, Charter, Cox. We sell across the world. Originally we grew on the back of broadband cable, and over the last 10 years we've grown very much into fibre. We see it as the horses for courses. With broadband cable there's still lots of opportunity with DOCSIS 4 to, in a sustainable way, use the existing cables that are in the ground or in the air, and that's certainly how a lot of countries have gone. But in the UK, where we're very, very lucky, the way Virgin Media was built, it's got ducts in most of its construction, and therefore there's a massive opportunity to be able to upgrade to fibre. So let me just look at how fibre broadband is. And my belief that the way fibre has been built in the UK, the altnets, it's very, very similar, and I see a complete repeat of what happened in the early days of broadband cable. Lots of very, very enthusiastic young companies with great ambitions, and I think one of the dangers and one of the important things that investment behaviours must change. It's not about homes passed, it's homes connected. And I think the important thing I've learned over the last 30 years is that the differentiation for broadband is not really speed. Speed is important. Speed up to 100 meg, a gigabit, very, very important. The most important thing is resilience and reliability. And you know, in the typical home now, where even the most basic home has at least 25 devices, including alarms, cameras, all types of lawn mowers, vacuum cleaners, all using broadband. The resilience of broadband has become never more important. And in terms of the way things are being built in the UK, FTTx is greenfield, but most broadband is actually handoff from broadband cable or XDSL, and the way in which it's done is very, very important. And I think the important thing really is that the way networks are built has got to be thought very, very carefully, because quite often the build is acting like it's going to be very, very high penetration, which is how telecoms were originally built. And of course, when you're overlaying, it's a very, very successful player is going to get 30-40% maximum, not really any higher unless there's no other competition. But of course, nowadays there's competition from fixed wireless access, as well as still if you look at the figures, there's still about 25% of customers still are happy to just keep going with their 10 megabits of DSL. So as a company, we look at how do we reduce the capex, stretch the capital, and that's really where building networks like a telco isn't really the way to do it. You've got to look at the way the construction's done. You've also got to look at the types of buildings. MDUs, running cables in MDUs is very, very difficult, especially post Grenfell Tower. Running cables up and down tower blocks has got a lot of liabilities. Touching fire safety in buildings has a lot of. So if at the end of line you can use existing cabling, there's massive advantages and cost savings. And then even in towns, where just crossing the threshold, we've developed a solution for just the last 10, 20 meters into a house, which saves money. So lots of different solutions, but it's about optimizing the capex and optimizing and lowering the opex through better management, because labor costs get ever higher and availability of skilled people gets lower. So I believe that the way things are done, you can't just think of it in an engineering way, you've got to think of it in an operational way. So one example for Technetix has been moving to a mini remote OLT. This is something we've rolled out and been very, very successful with. This is a way to get away from chassis OLTs, and it's worthy of consideration for pretty well any build in the UK, especially in overlays on HFC cable or any sort of upgrades, and also in medium to low density installations. The important thing with mini ROLTs is that they can be installed close to end users and have much more flexibility. Our solution allows GPON, XGS-PON and upgrade to 25 gig PON without any regret spend. And that's the important thing, is that the spend is not wasted to be ripped out in 5 years' time, and it's also upgradable without having to do any civil engineering. The important thing really is to be able to selectively upgrade into existing areas and do it in a most cost-effective way with lower initial investment, and just the way that cable succeeded 25 years ago globally. They didn't have any capital compared with telcos, but they were able to grow and be number one in broadband by having very low success-based capex. So reducing operational expenses, that includes lower power consumption, no fans. I mean, equipment out in the field with fans, I don't know whoever thought of that. Space efficiency, small form factor, so it can go on facades, on poles, on cupboards in buildings, and effectively going on. The important thing also by having local OLTs is lower latency, closer to end users, and optimizing the bandwidth allocation, so you actually can allocate the equipment as needed. So that was all I had to present, but I can certainly in questions go into some of our solutions we're developing. Thank you.
That was too easy. We'll get to that later. Yeah, there's some issues there. We do know who's next now, though, don't we? Here.
Hi everybody. I must have misread the brief because I've only got 2 slides.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's what I had as well.
Yeah. And I was only going to
You
have
did a
one.
good job, sir.
You took
All you could get.
So effectively, it's an introduction, just an introduction into what your company done and how it's enhanced telecoms over the years. So I was visiting a customer a few months ago, and there were some young apprentices there putting some fibre in. And we're known for the black boxes, I'm going to call them. CBTs, I think everybody else calls them. Everybody else in the world calls them multiports, but we call them CBTs in the UK. And this apprentice said, "Oh, I didn't realise you did fibre," which came as a bit of a shock to me, because we effectively created the first low-loss fibre in the world back in the 1970s. So step with me, if you will, back to 1966. A young physicist, Charles Cailem of the STL, not the STL that we all know now, but the old Standard Telecom Labs down in Harlow, I think it was. I'm looking at people in the room who were around at that time. Not necessarily 66, but no, yeah, obviously, clearly. He kind of drives through the idea that came from the National Physics Laboratory for conducting communications through glass and through light. Now, the post office at the time said, "Yep, we think we can work with that." So they contacted Corning in the late 1960s, and it took a long time and a lot of cash. And come 1970, August 1970, a very good month, a very good year, a lot of things were created, myself included. I was born that in August, as was Alan Shearer, if there's any fans of Newcastle in the room. And 2 scientists, Peter Schultz and a chap called Donald Keck, two of these scientists here, created a breakthrough in manufacturing glass fibre. And that's when the industry was started, August 1970. And it was a breakthrough because it was deemed that anything below minus 20 dB per kilometre was a success. And essentially that was the creation of the communications part of Corning Inc. Move forward a few more years, Post Office in conjunction with AT&T in America landed the first optical cable into Cornwall, into Helen's neck of the woods, Porthcurno. So that essentially was my introduction into Corning. But I did one more slide in terms of what we've brought, kind of a potted history in terms of what we call the carrier networks. It's a very American term. So 1970, first low-loss fibre was created, 78, loose tube cable, ribbon cable in 1992. 2004, we moved into our CBTs, black boxes, hardened connectivity. And that was driven by the need to kind of reduce costs in deploying networks, fibre to the home networks in particular in America, where splice costs were extortionately high. Again, drove through multiple different innovations, clear curve fibre for MDU drops, so it's a bendable fibre, the precursor to the A657 fibre, and then through different parts of exchange equipment, binderless technologies and so forth. But let me just take you back into the early 90s. Again, I'm looking at people in the room who were involved in quite a few of those early trials in fibre to the home. And it was here in this country that drove, you know, we think we were lagging behind. But in the early 90s, I'm remembering the old Altium rings from BT, we drove innovation in this country in terms of how we deployed fibre, how we were going to use fibre. We mentioned resilience on PON networks. I remember the time it was 4 fibres drop. I mean, it was great for us as a fibre manufacturer, but it was 4 fibres for every person's home in the country. And those were the innovation days in terms of deploying fibre. And I think just stepping forward a little bit in this rural deployment kind of sessions that we're looking at today, is that we need to kind of think through those days and just try and project into how we can innovate and deploy fibre differently, move away from this cookie cutter approach that we're using now in towns and cities, and be more engineering free, shall we say, as Helen's mentioned in Cornwall, in how we approach fibre deployment rurally. And that's it from my side. Very brief, very short, but yeah.
For someone with only 2 slides, you still managed 9 minutes. Interesting, thank you for that, because I think the middle one of those 3 gentlemen in the photograph was Professor John Midwinter, later Professor Sir John Midwinter, who was the BT professor at UCL, who spotted me and asked me to join the BT labs, which is where I started my career, so thank you, John. Also, you're a Newcastle fan.
No, I'm not. We can rugby league. That's fine.
Because this weekend has spoiled one of my definitions of people. I always used to say that people were Newcastle United, because Newcastle United, the thing about them is they believed that they were the best football team in the world. Despite all the evidence to the contrary, they would not give up. They were still the best football team in the world. And this weekend, the Buggers have finally won something, so I'm going to have to think of somebody else. Anyway, right, we are now at the end of all the presentations. Do we yet have any questions, heckles, comments? Who here works in fixed wireless access? Anybody fixed wireless access? According to Alex, it doesn't work.
Well, we're fine now, you've just come back in the room, so...
He is in the room, yes.
I would challenge the premise that double the customers is half the quality on wireless, and yet not on an on GPON.
Thank you very much. Exactly the thought going through my mind.
Interesting concept on finite bandwidth. And also, I also find people are interesting, and I get this, I'm CEO of Inco, which is like 99.9% fibre members. Fibre isn't just the only answer. It's got a toolbox with just one tool in. You go into your garage, you open your toolbox, it's got lots of things in. And that's the solution. It's not one solution, it's many. Also, yeah, wireless 10 years ago was very different.
Speak up for a moment so we can get some microphones back. Helen, Tommy.
Sorry, nobody heard it. Okay, so I was just saying how lovely all of that was, and everybody said everything great. No, so just to challenge the premise that wireless isn't the solution. It isn't the only solution. I grant that, absolutely. There's no one solution to any problem. But it is part of the solution, I would suggest. I'd also suggest that a modern look at it would be a better way. 10 years ago, wireless wasn't great. It was adequate, and it got 30 megs to people, which was better than nothing, which is, in Cornwall, our experience is what they had. Now, the most recent release of shared access licenses, 2 gigahertz of spectrum is available. You can do gigabit over that quite happily, and you can do gigabit to lots and lots of people. So I would challenge the old look at it. And also the example given was Euston Station. Well, that's mobile. This is fixed wireless access. This is very different and has a different premise behind it, and different QoS and those kind of things. So just my challenge back to our nice committee here is, do you think that wireless, is your thinking on wireless older than the reality of modern technology? And do you think that fibre has to be taken everywhere? Is that the only way that the UK can be gigabit capable?
I think I agree with you that wireless has a solution. The rider on my comment there was that to deliver good wireless, you've got to deliver deep fibre. Because if you're doing gigabit wireless, you've got to take it somewhere, and point-to-point microwave isn't really going to cut a must for very long. So fibre, to drive fibre deep enough to drive a mobile mast is pretty much all the way there. Anyway.
It's almost the last mile.
Yes, almost the last mile. So what I conjecture is it's inevitability that fibre has to go very deep. So get on with it.
Yeah, I think you're right. If you look at the United States market, fixed wireless access has really kicked the arse of fixed broadband. I mean, if you go back 3 to 5 years, all the predictions was that the growth of fibre was all about stealing market share off XDSL. But actually, the guys that are doing the biggest growth are T-Mobile in the US, and it was originally thought they were just using empty space on their network. Well, that's not true. They're investing. So they've got a certain section of the market. They can't do multi-gig very easily on their existing infrastructure, but there's a section of the market of 25% of people where 100 megabits reliably delivered is all they need. That's what I said, multi ways to get a customer.
I mean, I'll show a slide a bit, but Amcom by background is a WISP. When we got involved, it had 830 wireless customers. It's got 815 today. There's absolute time and place for it. I agree with Alex, you're going to drive fibre as deep as you can. And at the end of the day, out of preference, I'd always have a fibre over wireless connection. But it comes down to economics at the end of the day. There are bits of rural Britain you cannot serve economically with the fibre. And there are consumers out there who don't want to sign long-term contracts and are happy to take short-term wireless solutions. So I think what I would say is we shouldn't have endless debates about the technology is A better than B better than C. We've got to recognise the economics dictate.
Who here installs XGS? Okay. Anyone happen to know? Sorry, was someone you were about to ask a question?
I have a question.
Yeah, go on.
Okay, thank you. So, talking about the possible elephant in the room for debate, I'd love to hear the panel's views. So, Leo seems to be gaining quite a lot of traction at the moment. The Starlink is up and running. OneWeb's doing some stuff, kind of Project Kuiper coming along as well. It's been routed for rural access. It's also been routed for backhaul for mobile cells in rural areas as well. What do the panel think about that as an adjunct or possibly a replacement for some of the technology we've been talking about so far?
That's a good one. Who wants to go?
I can answer that. I mean, the number one problem with the current one, Starlink, is they've got a max capacity of 15 million customers globally, and they're currently selling to 4.5 million is the current estimate. So it's really a solution for, well, in fact, the Americans call it frontier, which is one level down. That's not Cornwall, that's the real outback, North Dakota or somewhere.
Well, what's the 15 million limit caused by, and can it be fixed?
Yeah, their next plan will be more, but it still will be limited. If you want reliability, fixed is the best.
Helen, did you want to say anything?
So, like everything, it has a place, but we looked at how that network had been put up, Starlink, and it was an experiment, let's be honest, in the first instance, and there is a lot of space junk up there as a result of it. Then the first ones were done. Okay, they've moved on, and I think OneWeb probably is a better solution, shouldn't say, but I think it probably is. There's a place for it. It's too expensive for consumers to install and maintain unless they're absolutely desperate. And I think it is frontier technology. There'll be some places that we should use it and some places we shouldn't. There is also the whole thing about security and satellites and how that's going to work and how easy that you manage those types of communications. At the end of the day, broadband and all forms of communications is our infrastructure to this country, and they are vital to our national security. You've got to ask yourself some questions about some of those satellite LEOs and how secure they are and what you're putting up there, and particularly for business. So I think it's frontier technology. It's got a place. It needs some improvement. I'd like to see it more European based. I think we've got the capability to do that. And I think what we will produce will eventually outrun what Elon Musk has done in the area.
There is something I find slightly disturbing about Sky. One of my friends and colleagues, Ian Smith, is a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society. And when you talk to him on Teams, you'll get all sorts of different photographs behind him of various nebula and whatever that he photographed. And there was one where he photographed Aurora Borealis. I was looking at this. and there were 5 dots in a line on it. And I said, oh, what's that? Is that something? He said, oh yeah, that's the latest Starlink launch. They launch in a cluster and then they spread out. And then they do another one and then they spread out. And how much junk do we need up there before it all starts causing problems? To me, that just seems a bit disturbing. Anyway, I have distracted myself from something that I was going to say. XGS PON. Thank you. Brilliant. Yes. Right. Yeah. What's the optical reach that you get from XGS PON? 12 kilometres. Depends on what split ratio. You can get up to 24, 20 certainly if you lower the split ratio. Yeah. How many customers in a rural area can you get on a 20-kilometre? Two. So there are only 2 people within a, yeah? And so the point between those 2 is going to have power, is it? Yeah. Does anyone feel that their lines are being held back for the lack of a smaller OLT? No? You feel your life is held back, you would be more complete if you had a smaller OLT. You are alone in this room, which I think is probably an interesting concept. Who was it? Paul, you were talking about small OLTs. Well, are you getting a lot of demand for small OLTs? Because to me it seems a little bit...
Well, the answer is that small OLTs allow a much more manageable solution. Shelf-mounted require lots of investment in civil engineering. You need a building, you need something very, very expensive, and you put them maybe clusters of thousands of homes. It's just a very much more expensive way of doing it based on the fact that you're expecting very high penetrations. Mini ROLTs are a way to reduce the blast radius of risk and to go to exactly where the customer's homes. And in fact, on upgrading broadband cable networks, it's particularly useful because you can put them in the same architecture as cable, which is normally in 250 to 1,000 home groups. So it absolutely fits in very well. The thing that our customers want is they don't want things with fans, they don't want things with nudging, they want something that's IP68 and you can bolt it anywhere you want to put it. So I'm not saying that it's just another way of doing it, which has a lot of advantages in a lot of applications, that's what I'd say.
Okay. Oh.
Okay. So I think you can't say it's wrong or right, it's just a suitable solution.
Where's the fun in that?
A counter question. So if you're building a network, who out there can afford to build a centralised OLT with all of the fibre count to reach every premise within those rural areas?
Tom says that they can. Well, in a sense, let's look at that. That's one of the issues that the XGS PON, the PON network, is it reduces. Sorry, Helen.
I think it would be worth asking Tom to answer that question as well if he doesn't mind, because we've got similar sort of networks. But if I start,
no, you can't ask Tom that because he's on next.
Yeah, it doesn't come at the same thing. At the end of the day, the way that the rural networks are being funded, to be honest, are down to Project Gigabit. So when you put your bid in, you build a network which is going to serve all of the UPRNs which are on there. And in the process of doing so, you get either coincidentals or some commercials that pick up. So the thing about mobile networks is you must plan completely and utterly precisely, and you must make sure your core infrastructure is sufficient to support that, and then you very carefully pick and mix what you need to make those networks work. So actually you build that in because you're never going back. No one in their right mind ever goes back to a rural network if they can help it. So yeah, the rural networks are designed on that, partly because the way that they're funded, which is quite different to the commercial builds. Tom, you've got one similar to me, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to go from a technical point of view as part of the design with XGS PON, something that we've just started to adopt, which I'll talk about shortly, later on today. But in the planning process, you can do a lot from a centralised OLT, because in a rural area with the reach that you're talking about, you know, we aren't talking 20,000 customers, we're talking 1,000 customers. right? So you can load those into an OLT, and if you're very clever with the way you plan your fibre, your splitters and your reach to get to 100% of a rural area, it works, right? You have your centralised area and you have maybe 5 or 6 routes that come out from that, going all the different ways to your reach, and you can make it work. You know, for us at the moment, we don't need extra power later on, we don't need additional micro OLTs or whatever else. That's just because of the environment we're working in. I'm not saying it's not a solution that's suitable, there'll be a place for it. But I think for us in the planning process and working with Project Gigabit, we've found a solution that gets us to all those properties with fibre.
Yeah, we built the east of England, and again, we didn't need rural OLTs for that. And it's the way the geography works. You know, if you're lucky, it works out. If you're not so lucky, then you have to come up with another solution. The downside of a remote OLT, you need power, which is expensive, difficult, and a maintenance nightmare.
Yeah, there
are some geographies where you need it.
We try and keep power to a minimum. You know, because it's very, very difficult to get a reliable power source in a rural place. Yeah. Really difficult. So if we can keep that to an absolute minimum and just load it with batteries that will last days if there's sort of a power outage, then the rest of the net is passive, stays online.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of resilience, we all have to look at resilience at different levels. I design broadband networks, it's one of the things that I do, and that means I do a bit of data, about the same as a small village. And in terms of me keeping, I have battery backup in my house, the 3 computers going. The only sort of vulnerable part of my network is the kettle, which is the other essential bit of the kit. And that's certainly more vulnerable than the rest of it. Oddly though, I find battery backup, if it can last 20 minutes, that's 90-something% of the outages that you have to survive. Most of it you don't need 10. So if you're doing days, that really is robust.
Yeah, I mean that's due to accessibility in, let's say, a storm environment with trees down on the roads. You can't get to your green cabinets to put generators on, so you want to have the maximum amount of availability there. And then when you're talking in the homes, you know, we're recommending little UPSs that will last at least 3 hours, so people can, you know, survive the brownouts and that sort of thing. If something major going on, most of the farms have generator systems and so on, so they can keep their essentials going. And as long as the actual line is live, broadband can stay on, right?
Yeah. Sorry,
I'll be quiet.
But replying to that, I think that it's horses for courses, and one of the issues is if you've actually got the capital to build 100% from day one, well done, that's great. But a lot of situations, you don't have that. You need to grow on a success base, and you need to keep costs down. You need to have something which doesn't require buildings or racks or green street cabinets necessarily. There's no solution which is the catch-all. It's just a way to reduce cost and to stretch capital to the limit, and that's where our success has come from, for people who don't have government grants to pay for them to build out. And you're very lucky if you've got them, and that's excellent.
Question right at the back.
I thought you might have had a microphone as well. I think got to that side. Cheers, thank you. Yeah, hi. Going back to the discussion earlier on there, you're talking about the killer app and what is going to drive the bandwidth that all your customers need. The government are kicking around options for switching off digital terrestrial television. They're looking at ideas. We think that's going to be coming soon. Are not 100% of all homes in the UK going to need a better form of connectivity to be able to supply television? And is that coming from you guys with the current plans you're currently working to?
That is an interesting question. When I left BT at the end of 2000, I was given the job of coming up with a broadband strategy for them. And so I presented it in a spreadsheet, because everyone hated my spreadsheets. So they didn't look at it for 3 months after I left, apparently. And then eventually someone just thought, well, what is this then? And look at my broadband strategy. And there was a graph on it which showed the pay-per-view television. And at the bottom of it, it said, football will pay. And then basically they'd expect us to what to go and build out. television is one of the issues that is going to fund and require the ongoing development of bandwidth. Any comments on that?
I would suggest that quite a lot of households are already free of the aerial. Even if it's on in the aerial, the other 4 people watching it are watching somebody else at the same time. So there's probably 4 channels of TV and terrestrial and free-to-air TV. I suspect free-to-air TV is going to turn itself off.
There's actually a... Sorry, just for information, there's actually a DCMS working group on the future of television distribution at the moment, and they're working through the various options. Their thinking is it's around 2034 that the changes need to be made in terms of IPTV, public service broadcasting over IPTV, and various options for either night lighting or changing how over-the-top broadcasting is done. So that's something that's in the conscious mind of the government at the moment. The challenges for IP network providers is, yes, we get a gigabit to the door, but if you're doing a live broadcast, for example football, and you want to see the actual football, then that becomes onerous on your core network as well as, out to the edges, and that's something that I don't think government's properly considered yet. I think for the BBC, they just want to turn off the transmitters and save the money, and turn all the costs over to us lovely fibre providers. Yeah.
If you pass the microphone over your right shoulder.
Could I comment a little bit on that? Some really interesting stuff there, and TV is my specialist subject, as they say. So the stats are, I would recommend everybody, the Ofcom, prior to the DCMS review that's running at the moment, Ofcom published a paper on the future of broadcast distribution last year, which I would recommend to everybody here. It's a really excellent read. The stats contain in it about 20% of households consume their television via a broadband connection at the moment, as opposed to 80% still using broadcast. You're absolutely right about 2034, that's the renewal date for DTT licences. However, the DG of the BBC, for example, has said that before the end of the decade, they're looking to switch off conventional broadcast distribution. Neil's Paul quote comes to mind, making predictions difficult, particularly about the future, but it may be sooner than 2034, I guess. And then just picking up the point you made about the challenge of lots of people viewing the same content at the same time. That's something that certainly I work for BT that we've been working on. We have a technology called MAUD, Multicast Assisted Unicast Delivery, which takes the AVR streams that everybody's consuming, runs it in multicast over a network, and then drops it back out to unicast at the edge. We think that has great promise generally for everybody that faces this problem. It's a global problem with broadcast switch off. We're in trial with it at the moment. We'll see where that goes, I guess.
Yes, Mark Bell, I actually work for the BBC, and it's not our intention to just turn off broadcast distribution and hand the bill to the...
You almost think Paddy had said it for comic effect.
Tim Daly has said all sorts of things about delivery of content, and you can't ignore the trend to on-demand consumption from video broadcast. But yes, there are problems delivering live events, capacity of core networks, so I agree with that. But, turning off broadcast platforms, I don't know, I detect a certain nervousness, and I don't work in BBC distribution, but there is a nervousness about doing that. And really, broadband has got to be a lot better than it is today before we're going to hit the kill switch on broadcast. Because the consumption of broadcast content in car, in home, and with older demographics is very, very strong. And I live in the London conurbation. I don't have gigabit fibre to the home, and I'm still waiting for it. So, and there's a lot of people who've got nothing. And come on, I mean, what would we have done during the pandemic without broadcast? Broadband just isn't good enough. So
an interesting point there, you said broadband has got to be better. In what way do you mean better?
Well,
Because I mean, I've got gigabit, but I live in...
The BBC tries to make content from all sorts of places. We can't get the signals back. You know, we've mentioned Starlink. We're using Starlink to patch up broadband connectivity in all sorts of places because there just isn't the connectivity. Yes, it's going to saturate. You know, that's already been mentioned. But this is being used because it's very, very difficult. You know, I've got somebody who's working on volumetric video capture, who wants to do stuff at the Radio 1 event in Liverpool, and you know, we're scratching around to wonder how we get you know, hundreds of megabits of video from the volumetric capture project back into a core network. The connectivity is very, very expensive for ad hoc connectivity. Connectivity you've got is often shared and saturates. The mobile connectivity is often very, very disappointing. You know, people talk about 5G, we've got this sort of hybrid of 4G and 5G, all of that uplink is carried by 4G. I think we're in poor shape, really, and there's a lot to do.
Tom,
so,
you want to heckle or heckle? Yeah.
Hi, Tom Ray from Barn again. Yeah, no, sorry, I was waving my arm around madly because I think what you've got, certainly in this room and I think in the industry, is a lot of altnets who are building a very good backbone network, right? So you've got Helen, the Wildanet, sat next to Oggy right here, and there are many more in the room who have the flexibility to go and build a very capable core network. And I think, just for an example of what was mentioned just there, if the BBC would like a link anywhere in the northwest where we are, I can give you a 400 gig link, like the same day if you want one. And that's the flexibility of the altnets, right? So, okay. But it's whether that's accessible or not, right? Because that's what we want to do. We want to build a core network that can handle live events, not saturate our networks, future-proof, right? And I think, I mean, I'm speaking for others here, but I think we're all building core networks that are resilient, connected into, you know, Manchester, into Telehouse North London, into Newcastle, into Leeds, into all of the major data centres in the United Kingdom. So then we can offload that. All you need to do is ask. And I think, you know, in terms of doing live television, we're ready for it. And I think a lot of other altnets are also ready for it.
I think this, kind of like between the two of you are getting to one of the key challenges, opportunities, things that we need as a sector to address. In that, yeah, there is a fantastic network out there. It's not ubiquitous. But some years ago, I was talking to a woman in Liverpool who was developing a digital health system for Liverpool. And because the surgeons and whatever couldn't hand over to the digital system unless everyone had it, they decided they were going to install a wireless, fixed wireless access, gigabit capable network for the whole of the Liverpool city region. I had to point out that 90-something% of them already had gigabit capable fibre. So let's use what's available and fill in the gaps rather than completely overlaying it with an absolute white elephant. And I think if we can fill in the gaps and make that available on a simple to access system, then that's where we need to get to. There might be one or two challenges in the way, on the way of doing that. Any more questions? Questions only seem to be coming from...
Sorry, just one quick supplemental. So, how many people's networks are multicast enabled? Just about. Yeah, that's great. That's quite promising.
I think with the altnets when we started off, and I'm looking at Oggy and Barn here, we really tried to design a gold standard network as a differentiator and the quality of the service. So when Storm Irwin came, for instance, we had no outages, none at all. Okay, you know, we hit the 90.99959s every time, every month. And I think your networks are the same. We built networks which were designed to last. They weren't cheap. They were properly distributed. They were done for contention. They can burst up to 100 gig. They're designed for the next 40 years. And I think that's the bit everyone forgets about us as altnets. There's quite a lot of engineering pride in what we're doing. I think very similar, we've got about a third of our people are all ex-signallers. We built a military grade network because Paddy doesn't know how to build anything else, you know, and that's really, really served us well. And I think that quality piece, when we're talking about the financing of the industry and everything, gets missed out. One of the highlights of the altnets is we have built high grade quality networks which will last forever, as long as they need to last the next 40 years before anything happens. It's fair?
I think I would completely agree with you, but there are some altnets out there who haven't, because they're just trying to focus on capital efficiency, and as a consequence they have built subpar networks, and you're seeing it coming out in customer service. And I think at the end of the day, ultimately what's going to change your take-up is whether your customer service is good or bad, and that comes back to all the points you've just raised there.
I'm afraid that is a very good point. From my cynical perspective, I see kind of two different ways of building networks. Like Helen, some of the others in this room, networks are built to serve customers and they are there for the long term. Others appear to have been built on the premise of an exit strategy, and they are different networks. Melissa, how are we doing for time? We're on till. Just heckle when it's time for me to go. Yeah. Okay. Any more questions? Any more issues? Any more burning issues? See, one of the things that has interested me is, you know, we've all gone out and we've done it again. I am one of the old gits of the industry because I did the first broadband, and then I did the second first sort of super fast broadband rollout, and we're here kind of doing it again. And we're at that point where we've, a load of people have gone out and built gigabit capable fibre networks, and the demand for it is really quite embarrassingly low. And that's seen as being a bit of a problem. That means all the bankers start thinking, oh, blimey, now I do. Anyone from the banking industry here? Excellent. Because I did have a bit of a problem. In 2008 and 2010, they proved they can't run their industry, and now they want to run ours. Get off. So anyway, it happens the same every time. So we get to the point where we've built this network, there's no demand, and then everyone catches up, and suddenly there's a demand. And you think, oh damn, why didn't we build the rest of it while we had a chance? Well, we really do need to keep going, because because I'm a consultant, I do a little bit of research on this, just so from time to time I can actually have data and pretend I can know what I'm talking about. We looked at tracking the demand for bandwidth in households and how that goes, and what happened at the superfast rollout. What it is that when the 95% percentile bandwidth that you can get has got to the point where it doesn't meet your bandwidth requirements during the busy hours, you suddenly start to say, this broadband's not working anymore, it's deteriorated, it's not as good as it used to be. What it really means is that all your neighbours and all the other people who are connected to the same bit of network are using more, and so the bandwidth available at busy hour isn't enough. And everyone judges, or most people will judge their network at busy hour, which is a bit inconvenient because that's when they say it works. We are getting very, very close to that point again. The demand for broadband and bandwidth in households has been going up 30% year on year for a long time. Now, in COVID, it went up to 36%, and that was big, and then it's done some weird stuff after that. So actually, it's slowed down. It's kind of given us a bit of breathing space. But we are about 2 to 3 years from everyone, large numbers of people starting to say, my FTTC and my cable broadband is not working properly anymore, it's deteriorated. If we haven't got the network in place by that point, it's all going to look a bit embarrassing. So we are at kind of a sort of critical stage in sort of the evolution of this infrastructure. We need it soon. Sorry, soapbox, I'm getting off now. Any other, it's not about me, is it? Any other questions? Yeah, one other that. Michael. I see you divided and conquered. Yeah, so.
yeah, I sat over here, but still from Barn. We are slowly taking over, and you'll hear more from us later on. No, I think that's absolutely agree with your point there in terms of the sort of the demand and when we're going to hit the demand. But just, I think, to pick up on Helen's point, I think that paints everything as a very sort of transactional approach with the customer. You know, the customer sat at home, it is a transaction. When do I need this capacity? Okay, I need the capacity. I'm going to go and create a transaction with one of these providers. Whereas I think the sort of the difference of approaches is a community-centric approach. It almost becomes a values-based approach in terms of the uptake. It's not about the transaction, what do I need now? It's about the value that is created by having the full fibre network in that community. Rural communities in the north, and I'm sure in Cornwall, they're very used to being left behind. They're very, the last 200-300 years, they've been left behind in sort of every technological evolution. And so having this sort of conversation with the whole community about the value of having full fibre to the home, having an enduring, resilient network that means in 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time, you will still have the best internet because the fibre will still be delivering the service. We're not going to change the speed of light, but we may change the boxes at either end of it. Then that becomes the sell. The sell isn't the speed today. The sell is the engagement with the community about what it means for that community in 50 years' time, what it means for their children and their children's children in that community to have a full fibre resilient network that soaks through 100% of the properties in that community. And if you can flip that conversation, I think that's where you see the difference in penetration between the old nets that are working with the communities and for the communities and the other old nets that are purely working for the bankers and trying to create something that they can sell in the next 5 years.
I think that's a really good point. Can I comment on that? So I think if you were to, rather than the engineering solutions, if you were to turn this around to a social economic argument, there are 4 reasons why broadband doesn't get adopted. 1, they haven't got coverage. That's blimmin' obvious, isn't it? So that's what's been going on for the last couple of years. 2, it's not affordable. Social tariffs is much more important than people realise. Really important. Putting the prices up halfway through a contract. Really? Okay, people are really got a cost of living crisis out there. You need to think about how you're doing that. So pricing and making it transparent is really important. The third element then is really about devices. So during lockdown, we had a situation in the southwest where a lot of children couldn't get access to advice or to broadband, and they were learning off mobile phones. And we ran basically a Kit 24 programme where we were redistributing kit from businesses into homes in the southwest with the Good Things Foundation. It is more a problem people realise. People don't have devices. It is a sign of poverty. God help us if we have another pandemic, because then that generation of kids will also get left behind and people won't be able to work if they haven't got devices. So that's important. But the fourth one is a more nebulous and I think more important element. And it's one I encounter, which is not socially, demographically across segmentation, but it is widespread, which is about digital confidence. And it's not the same as skills, okay? So people are fearful of technology, and rightly so. You should handle with care. They have questions about security, they have questions about their children's access to information, they've got questions about their own data. And none of that has been fed in a way that's appropriate. I mean, some of the rubbish talked about AI has me laughing more than Mr. Trump does at the moment, quite frankly. You know, it needs a common sense wrap around it. And digital confidence, I think, is the biggest challenge we face as an industry. Because if you want to get those adoption rates, you need to deal with the yes but conversations. And when we're talking to customers, those yes but conversations are critical. And if you are not going to spend the time on the doorstep explaining to the other 30% who need to adopt this technology, you're not going to get them to take it. If you're not prepared in your customer services to slow down and explain how you reset a router and why it works, if you don't explain about parental care settings, all of this stuff really matters. And actually, when you look at South Korea, who've had masses of success with GVA connections to adoption rates, and they're about 14 years ahead of us now as a result of it, in addition to actually paying for the network, what they also did was they took the community with them, much more than we have done. I think we probably left people behind and have not been educated in what this means and not felt confident. So when we talk about standards, I'm less worried about the technical standards and how we sort out how we're going to get around bursting data. I'm more concerned about setting rules about what people can use and making them more confident in what they do. Now, if we do that, penetration will follow. It's there. Most people are in contract, they want to move, they want to do something different, but they want the security of someone who is doing something which is more than transactional. And until everyone grasps that, you will not see the penetration rates in the industry that we are seeing. And that is true all around the edges of the UK, where we are acting as a community and we're fulfilling that requirement on digital confidence. We get customers, okay? And that is the bottom of where we are, and it's that fourth pillar now that as an industry we need to grasp. And it is explaining things like some of the technologies we talked about today, so it's not scary. Okay, so what do we do with satellites? Where do you use them? You need to explain to people where they are. We are miles behind in making that accessible to the people who are not engineers, so they can understand the decisions they're making and they can make those safely and a level of confidence around it. That's transformational to our skill base, it's transformational to our economy, it makes assisted living when people are older more likely, it makes e-health possible, takes the burden off the NHS. That's what we can unlock, but that is the size of the problem we're facing. It's not an engineering problem, it's a problem up here, it's a social problem we need to deal with.
Yeah.